A weary fighter begins to envision a quieter life after befriending a young child, but he is pulled back into a world that he tried to leave. No, wait, that's the plot of Shane. Okay. A retired hero reluctantly takes on one last job with the help of an old partner. No, that's Unforgiven. Okay, anyway, on this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Logan.
Nice.
Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair is Chad Smith. How are you, Chad?
I'm cold, Laramy. It's really cold, buddy. It's -9 degrees up here today, so... But...
the great wild north.
Yep.
Yeah. up in Alaska. You gotta love it. You're in the cold. Meanwhile, I am in the can't make up its mind from day to day state of Georgia.
All four seasons talked about can right happen 24 hours. Yeah.
We talked right before we recorded about how you have to dress for weather that's going to change somewhere between like 40 degrees, 30 in the morning, 70 by the time you leave work.
Yep.
Fun, good times. But hopefully it means we get to have snow here. We haven't had snow in Georgia in so long, and I heard y'all got it earlier this year.
Yep. Yeah, it snowed at my house on September 18th. Was the first snow this year. So.
It's not fair. It's not fair at all.
I'll bring hopefully some when I come home for Christmas. So.
Yeah. I don't need another snowpocalypse like we had several years ago, but I would love some snow.
Yeah, man.
I have a child that has never seen snow. We need snow.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and remove the curtain here and explain that Chad and I are actually re-recording this episode. Chad and I sat down and actually recorded this episode a couple of weeks ago, and unfortunately, due to some audio issues, it was an unairable show. You wouldn't have been able to understand half of the show.
I sounded like I was a very, very, very deep cover FBI informant, so yeah, it wouldn't have worked out too good.
Chad's identity was concealed during the episode, so you heard me asking questions, and then you just heard this rumble coming from the other end. So this is a re-record, and I wanted to let you know that in case, Chad and I kind of sound like we're rehashing something, or if we start talking about, like, did we mention that already, or...
I promise you we're not phoning it in. Like, we love this content.
We're definitely not... Yeah, and this is a movie that both of us, to go ahead and spoil kind of our final decision, both of us are a huge fan of this movie.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and get into it. So... the movie Logan was released March 3rd of 2017, even though it takes place in 2029. In the story, there have been no mutants born in the last 25 years. Wolverine's healing factor is kind of starting to slow down. He's getting older, and so we kind of get to see the effects of these mutant powers on really a human body. We also get Charles Xavier. He is 90 and has dementia, which is a horrible thing for a psychic to have.
So, but is that because of the cessation of mutant powers and they're decaying, or is he just human and old?
See, I think it's a mix of both.
Yeah.
I think it really is. Like I said, I think this... and I really wish it could have delved into it more. I do think that this is a lot of, as they establish the X gene is just an evolution in, humans. And so mutants are still humans.
Right.
But they just have this X gene, which we're now seeing, what happens to them. But again, in the movie, Wolverine is older. Xavier, like I says, 90, he's old. We don't really see anybody else that we're familiar with, other than a character that we saw very briefly in Apocalypse, Caliban, but it's a completely different character, or actor, I should say. So we don't get to really see much more than that. But in this one, Wolverine has to protect a little girl named Laura, who we discover has powers very similar to Wolverine, and we'll of course develop that as we talk for those who haven't seen the movie. And yeah, that's kind of the plot there. What I found interesting with the kind of making of this movie is that the intention was for this movie to be filmed back to back with Apocalypse.
Right.
Which makes no sense to me whatsoever.
No. I mean, I can't see where the final product of this movie, that was the intention. I think that early on in the filming process, maybe, or early on in the writing process, probably, that was the idea. But by the time they shaped this story, I don't think that was unless they were totally going to hand it off to the next generation of mutants. I mean, if that was the intent, that the group of young mutants, and of course we're jumping right to the end of the movie here, but the group of young mutants that survived the movie, if they were meant to helm the next film, that's kind of the only way that works.
Yeah, but then you're looking at, so you're saying we had the X-Men First Class run, which essentially ends, well, it ended in Dark Phoenix. Who am I kidding? It ended in First Class.
Yeah.
So you got that run, and now we're just going to go, okay, so now we're just going to build a whole nother run. And
well, I think they did that anyways. I mean, even though Hugh Jackman is literally in Days of Future Past, how's that the same Wolverine? Like, I mean, obviously we've made fun of their use of or not use of, whatever you want to call it, of timeline, and there's virtually no cohesion at all, but they had already done that. They were just starting a third franchise basically with Logan, I feel like, if they were going to move it to an Apocalypse film.
Yeah, I'm happy though with Logan being a one-off, with nothing ever coming from it. I think I'm happy with that.
I kind of think that's the genius. Like you were talking earlier about, you wish they had fleshed certain things out a little more, but I almost think that's the genius of the way this movie is because it can just sit alone. It really kind of doesn't need anything else. It's cool if you've seen, the two of them interact. If you've seen Professor X and Wolverine in the previous movies, that those two actors played the characters, and it makes a little more sense, but you don't even really need that. Like this movie, to me, it almost doesn't even need superpowers. Like, this is a story-driven film, not a superpowers-driven film. So, yeah. And I think that's why it works so well for me anyways.
Yeah, no, yeah, you and I have talked about that before. Of course, it could have been when we recorded this episode before. But yeah, to where this movie it's a story that has superheroes versus superheroes that are creating a story.
Yeah.
So I agree. And I think part of my fleshing out, and we'll get into this obviously when we talk about the moving panels, I think my fleshing out is just because the comic book run shows you so much with other characters.
Well, so, I mean, just to dive right into that, the comic book run is the polar opposite. I mean, it is for sure a super powered based story. Like, there's almost no character in it that's not super powered. Like, apparently, if you survived the apocalypse in the comic run, you had to have superpowers to do so, like, kind of thing. So yeah, it's very. And if
different. We go into since we're talking about it, if we go into the full comic run, which I was like 4 issues short of actually finishing, that definitely turned into, what other story can we tell and just throw Old Man Logan into it?
Yeah.
Like, that's definitely what that became to. But we'll get to that. Let's go ahead and get into our characters. And, of course, we'll start with Old Man Logan, Wolverine, James Howlett, whatever you want to call him, played for and I'm going to put quotes around this, final time by Mr. Hugh Jackman, who probably deserved an Oscar, in my opinion, for this role.
It's iconic for sure.
Yeah.
They'll just wait until he plays, a bad villain one of these years, and they'll give it to him for that instead. Just Malcolm X him. So
again, I won't get into the way the Academy Awards kind of pick and choose, but yeah, he was robbed. I don't even know who won it this year. I could look it up, but I don't care.
And if you're going to go there, I think you could have went with Patrick Stewart for Best Supporting. He is
definitely
phenomenal in this.
Definitely. I mean, when is Patrick? Well, I was about to say, when is Patrick Stewart not good? And then I remembered he voices the poop in the Emoji Movie.
Didn't he also do a cat in Cats? Pretty sure he voiced a cat. I haven't seen it. I don't.
Ian McKellen did. I don't know if Patrick Stewart did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I
don't
haven't
think
seen
Patrick
it.
Stewart did. I saw it. My eyes witnessed it. But yeah, that's where we're gonna. Speaking of musicals, though, do you know this was the same year this movie was released? Hugh Jackman also released The Greatest Showman.
I did not realize those were the same year. That is
2017, same year.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. That's a talented man right there.
Yeah, no kidding.
But again, talking about Hugh Jackman playing him, Hugh Jackman does hold the very specific Guinness World Record of playing a Marvel character for the longest amount of time.
So, but isn't Patrick Stewart also in the same amount of time, because he also was in X-Men and then he was also in Logan? So I mean, maybe does Hugh Jackman last longer in Logan, so that's why he wins? Like, what's the deal?
See, I couldn't find that, but I think that is so. Both of them have played the character for 17 years from beginning to end. I think the argument for Logan might be the fact that, and again, spoilers, I mean, dear Lord, if you're listening to this episode, is that Professor X, Charles Xavier, dies before Logan. And so technically Hugh Jackman goes a little longer playing the character. I also wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that James McAvoy has also played the same character
for part of that time. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that would be fair, because technically Hugh Jackman is also in that movie. So
yeah. So if you just go based off of screen time, I think Hugh Jackman has been Logan on screen longer.
Oh, for sure.
Than Charles Xavier.
He's got a whole extra movie, so
he's got two extra movies.
Yeah.
So, and then like you said, he makes the cameo in First Class. He's pretty much the main character in Days of Future Past,
right,
where Xavier's kind of just seen, or let me say Xavier, Patrick Stewart's Xavier is just kind of seen from time to time and throughout just that
the future scenes, yeah.
So yeah, but in July of 2015, while pre-production was still going on, Hugh Jackman did post an image of Logan, who was giving the middle finger with his claw, and he used the hashtag one last time. And so it has been said that this would be his last performance as Wolverine, as Logan. However, he had also said that if there was ever a chance of him being in the MCU, he would have done it. However, the MCU, he didn't realize that was going to be a possibility when he decided to make this movie and make that call.
You have to wonder if it's not partly just the same thing as Dave Bautista and Drax. Like, at a certain point, the man's just tired of eating nothing but chicken breasts and working out 17 hours a day. I mean, that has to factor into this. He's got to be tired of having to deal with that regimen for so long. Especially, I mean, he's 50s? Early? Late 40s?
Talking about Jackman or Bautista?
Hugh Jackman.
Yeah. I mean, he'd have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I are in our 40s, so yeah, I would say he'd have to be.
Yeah, he's got to be at least late 40s, so that's got to be taking its toll. But I don't know. I mean, I could see his point if he gets to play Wolverine in the MCU. Yeah. Even if let's tangent with that for a minute. What if he gets to be in What If?
Ooh, like just as a voice.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good possibility. I don't know, but you got Ryan Reynolds who is really trying to push at Hugh Jackman to at least make an appearance
Yeah.
in like a Deadpool movie. So, I mean, I again, that's why I put it in quotation marks. This is his last time
Right, right.
playing him. I mean, you look at Sean Connery, who said he would never play Bond again. Then he came back and did him for one more movie, which they actually titled "Never Say Never."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so,
I mean, was he
real
talking?
quick, I just looked it up. Hugh Jackman is 53.
This is pretty impressive. You got to think though too. Was he referring to? I mean, they kill the character. Maybe we're huge spoilers at this point, but again, if you haven't seen it, what are you doing here? But
Yeah.
I mean, is he saying it's the last time because, as far as they knew, he's literally going to kill Wolverine in the film. So he's thinking this is the last ride. Like that's the end of it.
Yeah, but I mean, come on, we're about to open a multiverse.
And he had just done a time travel movie. So yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
as Wolverine,
Yeah. And then,
Wolverine, not a different movie. Yeah.
Yeah. The whole Days of Future Past thing. Again, that whole timeline. The Fox, we need to do a one shot just trying to wrap our brain around the Fox X-Men timeline.
Yeah, no joke.
That would be like a 4-hour one shot.
Yep.
Of just the two of us just going
My head hurts. Yeah. Yeah. Oh man.
All right, well, let's go ahead and move on. We of course already kind of talked about him, but Charles Xavier, played once again by Patrick Stewart, also, like I said, 17 years, and as we've also said, just brilliant. I mean, Sir Patrick Stewart is amazing. I'm sure I can speak for Chad. Of course, he can say otherwise, but I mean, we grew up with him as Jean-Luc Picard, and we love him as Jean-Luc Picard. And then we got to see him. I mean, he was fan casting as, when Wizard Magazine, when we were kids, there was Wizard Magazine.
Yeah.
And when you fan cast the X-Men, it was always Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier.
Yeah.
Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier. And that's the one bit of fan casting that actually got to come true.
And lived up to everyone's expectations.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
Great. Nothing against James McAvoy. James McAvoy had his own decent run as Charles Xavier, but it's Patrick Stewart's on a different level.
Yeah.
We've then got our young hero, I guess you could say, Laura, played by a first time on screen Daphne Keane, who you could have fooled me that this was her first time acting.
Yeah. When we watched it, to do research and everything to record this, I remember thinking that I didn't really notice, when I saw it in the theater, I didn't really notice how long it was before she had any lines. Like, you get that she's like this angry kid and just grunting and, all this kind of stuff. But it made me kind of wonder if the directors didn't do that on purpose and kind of kept her, like really just held her hand and did a good job of bringing her along. I'm totally speculating on how child acting works. I mean, I don't know. I thought it was kind of clever in the sense that I feel like it probably gave her some time to get used to the other actors and how, kind of that timing works, all of those things. Because when she does start speaking, she kills it. And she's amazing.
Yeah. Even when she just starts blurting out the Spanish and then eventually speaks in English, and she's just so good. She's so powerful there at the end. Yeah, such a great. And of course she is playing a character that I think this is one of the rare times that this has happened. She's playing a character that was not originally from the comics. Right. She's playing X-23, who was actually created for the X-Men Evolution television series.
Yeah.
Debuted in episode 11 of season 3, and the name of the episode is X-23, which aired in August of 2003, and then didn't debut in the actual comics until February of 2004 in issue 3 of a comic called NYX. And in the comic book, it is revealed that she is a clone of Wolverine, but she's more of an adoptive daughter, where you more get the impression in this movie that they say the biology makes her more of a actual daughter. I
Yeah,
was
they're kind of
very
gray
confused
about
by
it. Yeah,
that.
yeah, they're kind
Yeah.
of gray about it in the movie, but I think they just wanted to leave a little bit of mystery there, so you kind of get the feeling that Logan almost doesn't want to know. It's better for
Mhm.
him, emotionally if he can kind of keep it at a distance at first, but then by the end of the film, it's he accepts her as daughter, so he doesn't want to know to upset that. Maybe that's just kind of the feeling I got, anyways.
Which
of
again
of
goes
the
into what we
ambiguity
talked
there.
about earlier. Yeah, it goes into what we talked about earlier about not having everything fully fleshed out.
Yeah.
Actually does work for this movie.
Yep.
But the character in the comics actually becomes Wolverine.
Yeah. That's what I was about to
Dons
say.
the actual moniker.
Great run. So she invented for a kids TV show and is now the comic run canon Wolverine, and is great.
Which,
The books are good.
yeah, she took the moniker in 2015, right before this movie came out. So again, if their intention was to create a franchise or to create a spinoff of some sort, I mean, it was a great timing for it. She's
Yeah.
kicking off her run as Wolverine in the comics. At the same time, you introduce her into the movies. And who knows, with the Fox merger with Marvel and them trying to work things out, maybe we will eventually see. I doubt it'll be Daphne King, but maybe eventually we will see.
She has been very vocal, though, in several interviews as late as, I think, just in 2020. She was in an interview saying that she's just kind of waiting to come back and play her again, that she loved the character and she'd loved another shot at that character and everything. So who knows?
Yeah, because she was 11, I think, when they filmed the movie. I think is how old she was. So you're looking at that was 2017, and you jump ahead. She's coming of an age where she could be a bigger character. I know that she plays a role in the His Dark Materials that's currently on HBO Max.
Oh yeah.
I know she plays a role in that. So even though this was her first movie, she's still working on things, and so hopefully we might get to see her. I mean, again, any of the X-Men. I think us comic book fans are just going, hey, they can be in the MCU now. Let's see them. So, all right, moving on. We've got our main. I say main villain just because he's the one that deals with most stuff, and that's Pierce. I don't think they ever give him a first name, but he is clearly Donald Pierce from the comic books, who first appeared in the Uncanny X-Men number 132 back in April of 1980. And just like most of the villains in the X-Men who aren't already mutants themselves, they hate mutants. And so that is how this comic book character is portrayed. However, in the movie, Boyd Holbrook plays him, and that character seems more that he actually admires.
He's a little bit of
mutants.
a fanboy. Yeah.
Yeah. And, he even tells Wolverine he kind of idolizes him and is a fan, and makes you wonder if his whole robotic thing is also him trying to, become his own kind of hero. And
So I'm glad you brought that up. One of my very few complaints with this movie is why in the world, other than that one cool shot where he has it reinstalled and his hand goes all the way backwards and forward.
Yeah.
It's really cool looking. Other than that one shot, what in the world is the point of this? The entire mercenary army that attacks Wolverine and the kids at the end of the movie are similarly cyborg people, and not a single one of them uses their cyborg arm, leg, whatever for anything. It doesn't help them defeat any of the kids. Like, I do not understand that choice in this movie making at all.
Yeah, so that little group, obviously, do they ever call them the Reavers in the movie?
I don't think so. It's clearly,
I can't remember that.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly what they are. They're referencing the books there, but it doesn't. They just seem like a bunch of rednecks that are probably vets that are disgruntled.
Like a militia.
Yeah, it's a bizarre situation, but
yeah, but I agree. Like you other than seeing his hand a couple of times, you almost forget that he's got a robotic arm.
Yeah.
And then you don't even realize, I think, sometimes that all the other guys have some sort of cybernetic limb or body part or whatever. Because, yeah, they don't use it to do anything.
And in just such a simple movie, and I mean, obviously, overall, it costs a lot of money and there's a lot of cool special effects and all that kind of stuff. But in a simple movie where it really was peel back all of the special powers, like that doesn't play nearly as big a part of the movie, like we were talking about earlier. And then you added this weird little side thing that then has no payoff. Even I guess that's what bugs me about it, is like you went minimalist and then you didn't on this like one thing. You decided to go like big Hollywood again here, and then, like I said a minute ago, there's not even a payoff, so it didn't make a lot of sense to me. But a relatively minor thing. It doesn't really take away from the movie. It's just a big like, what were you thinking, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Just to have him use his cybernetic arm to grab Logan by the neck at one point and pin him against a wall, or something.
Or what if it stops the claws just one time? Saves his life when Logan could have killed him. Like just anything. Like just one time where there was a payoff for him having a metal robot arm, other than just it looking cool. Like I don't know.
Or one of the Reavers who maybe has cybernetic legs is able to leap and jump and get in front of the kids when they were running at the end. Or it's wasted.
But the
let's
character,
go backtrack.
Yeah, to get back on track, sorry. But the character I like. They do play it like you were talking about. They do play him differently in the movie than you do in the books. But I enjoy the take. Like just everybody who's not a mutant hates mutants does kind of get old at a certain point. Yeah. Like apparently there's no one on the planet that's just ambivalent toward them, kind of thing. So the idea that this guy, does have a healthy respect for Logan and mutants. So to me, that's more interesting. I think the guy who is good at tracking down Logan because he kind of is obsessed with him maybe a little bit like that. That's more interesting to me than the dude who just, for whatever weird reason, just hates mutants altogether. So I actually like that change.
And it's always a political aspect of it too, typically.
Yeah.
Because Donald Pierce in the comics has a more political role, than just being a hired hand, as he is more in this one. But to go back also to our group of mutants, we also had Caliban, played by Stephen Merchant, in an, I will say, almost unrecognizable role.
And he's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, a guy who is known
someone
for...
who's so associated with
goofy comedy. Not even like dry, sarcastic comedy, that sort of thing. Like, he is a goofy... He played the goofy scientist, could have been boyfriend in The Big Bang Theory. I mean... he's that dude, and he really plays
the creator
a great
of the Office. Yeah.
And the way that he grows this character through the run, I mean, he's a coward. Like, it is kind of what it is. But to see him actually have an arc and grow and defend his friends, even though he doesn't do it as successfully as he had hoped when he sacrifices himself.
Yeah.
But the arc is still there, regardless of the end result of his sacrifice. Like, he does nobly sacrifice himself. And you kind of don't see it coming, but he plays it so well by the end, you buy it. You know what I mean? It wasn't just like, that didn't work. Why'd they write that in? Like, he sells it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Again, you started talking about the comedy thing, and I was like, yeah, this dude was in movie 43. Like, that's...
Yeah.
But no, Stephen Merchant is great in the role. He wasn't the first person to play the character. The character was played by Tomas Lamarque, or how you pronounce his name. I apologize. In Apocalypse, which, again, if they were going to do these two movies back to back, that doesn't make sense either.
Nope.
Yeah, but it is a character from the comics. Just to throw him out, since this is the first time we've mentioned him on the show. Debuted in Uncanny X-Men number 148 in August of 1981. The character is just like what it is. You know, he's able to sense, track, whatever you want to say, other mutants.
Which has to be the most... that's got to be the most disappointing mutant power for you to have. Like, you can just point out other people that do have mutant powers. You don't even have a mutant ability that helps you defend yourself, or anything. Like, it's I don't envy that dude.
Well, you say that this is going to be going into a complete different story here, but have you ever read the comic, I think it's called The Worst X-Man Ever?
No.
I think that's what it's called.
No.
It's called The Worst X-Man Ever, and it's about a character who his mutant ability is he has the ability to explode, but it will kill him.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah. So, I don't know. I think I'd rather be Caliban if I had a choice between the two.
Well, I mean, let's face it. Whether it's by Charles Xavier or by the evil scientist who wants to kill off mutants, you're going to be used. Like, that dude is just a used character.
Agreed. And then we go to the other villain, the man behind the curtain, per se. Dr. Rice, played by Richard E. Grant, who has now gotten to redeem himself by playing Old Man Loki in the MCU.
Yeah.
But this is a comic book character. It is Dr. Xander Grant, who first appeared in X-23, number 1, in March of 2005. So just like the movie portrays, he is the one who has created the character of X-23. You find out that his father was part of the Weapon X program, and that Wolverine actually killed his father when Wolverine went, crazy as part of that.
What a great scene that is, though, where it's almost a non-issue, just like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I killed your dad. Yeah, you did. It's like,
yeah,
all right.
But in the comic, it's this very odd story, origin kind of story. So he has a partner, another scientist, Dr. Sarah Kinney, and he forces her, manipulates her into being the one who carries their clone to term. So she gives birth to X-23, and then as Sarah is finding out that he's using Laura as a weapon, she gets Laura to kill Dr. Rice, but Rice had put something on Sarah that caused a pheromone release that triggered some programming in Laura to then kill Sarah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I'm kind of glad. I'm kind of glad they replaced that storyline with I'm failing to remember the character's name now, but the nurse in the movie that then kidnaps her out of the facility and everything. That would have just been too much for a film. I think that just kind of seeing a nurse, somebody who has given their life to the idea of helping people in healthcare, who risks it all to take a kid and try to get them out of harm's way. Like, that's, to me, that's like the level of investment that I need in a 2-hour film. Like, I'm not sure, it would be very difficult to pull off the whole arc of mother getting killed and being redeemed from that, all that sort of stuff. So I think it's a good choice.
Yeah, then you would have gotten into the whole, like we talked about earlier, of if you had an actual mother of Sarah, then you're having to explain again the whole, how is Laura biologically related to...
Is Logan her actual father? Yep.
So
that's a good point
again,
too.
The less you have, the more we don't have to pick a part that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Which has always been the case with the X-Men movies.
Yeah.
So in the movie, it is revealed that Dr. Rice created the transigen virus, which is what eliminated the mutant gene, supposedly, and is what is weakening Logan and Charles.
Right.
Going back to Caliban, is there ever any mention of Caliban's powers being weakened?
No, but I mean, even Logan's are like minutely. I get the feeling from the film that it's more that the adamantium was always poisoning him. And so as his mutant healing factor slows down just a little bit, it's a more dramatic effect because his body is also trying to poison itself constantly, and now it's got to fight that on top of trying to deal with him getting shot by some Mexican gangsters and stuff like that.
So what's your thought on Dr. Rice's kind of motive here? So it's implied that he's created this virus, which has put an end to the mutant gene. And then he creates an army of cybernetic soldiers, which aren't really working out to his liking. So then he goes back to creating mutants himself that he can control. It just seems like a very convoluted motive.
At the risk of critiquing the thing I love, it's very comic bookish. It's not there's not a lot of real world logic to this dude. And to be fair, they kind of play him that way. He doesn't seem like a real human being. He is very cartoonish, in my opinion. And it works.
When is Richard
for the
E.
film.
Grant never cartoonish, though?
This is true. But, yeah. But it works for this character to me. He comes across as one of those, like, the typical mad scientist. The guy who's smart enough to do things that he shouldn't, and so, awkward that he doesn't know better, sort of idea. So, he's not the chess player. He's not looking 20 steps ahead. He's just problem in front of him, and he uses his massive brain to solve that.
So going to a completely different franchise, and Tim and I did this episode already, and I'm not 100% sure. You and I don't think have ever talked about this movie. Who plays a better version of this character? Is it Richard E. Grant in this movie, or is it the character that... my mind just went blank. Is it the character that what's his name plays in Bloodshot?
Oh my gosh!
Because you realize it's the same character.
Whew. Yeah, but
it's the same character.
That's really tough to judge because the rest of that movie is such a train wreck that I don't know. You're not wrong.
That's who I was trying to think of.
Yeah, you're not wrong at all. So, and even it being Guy Pearce, like, that's kind of a cop-out too, because unfortunately Guy Pearce, who I think is a phenomenal actor, has just been cast as that dude, like, way too many times. So, yeah, is there anything that he's not the bad guy in? I mean, he's more or less the same character in Iron Man. Like, he just plays that guy. So, I think that this version is better solely on the fact that the rest of the movie buoys up a poorly written villain.
Yeah, so this is a whole different... We're doing a mini one-shot inside of this. So yeah, Guy Pearce has played the same character in Bloodshot, Iron Man 3, and Alien Covenant.
Yeah. And I mean,
because
you look
he
at other
plays
stuff.
Wayland.
Yeah, I mean, you look at... Maybe not in the like technology intelligence kind of thing, but like the Count of Monte Cristo, it's more or less, the guy who's gifted and arrogant and, used to be in control and now he's not, kind of thing. Like, I don't know. He plays that bad guy a lot. I think the only thing you can list him not in doing that is Memento. That's the only thing that comes to mind. But anyways, yeah, a weird mini one shot on Guy Pearce's bizarre career. So
yeah, because I'm racking my brain like what other movies like I'm trying to think of a movie that he's not the villain and he's not this arrogant villain, and like even freaking Bedtime Stories with Adam Sandler, like that's his character.
Yep.
So
it makes you wonder, is Guy Pearce like a really arrogant dude in real life? Like that poor guy. But,
you know what? I just thought of a movie where he's actually the good guy, but it's still the same character. The Time Machine.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's too funny. Yeah. Oh, that's so
He's
funny.
the arrogant scientist who gets put in his place, but he's the good guy in that one.
Yeah, he's the protagonist at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
oh my goodness.
Awesome.
Okay. All right, let's get back. Okay, it's fun. So there you go. So there's a one shot. We just had a nerdy conversation about Guy Pearce and Guy Pearce in movies. So there you have it.
Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes and VCRs and video rental stores? Is the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? If you want to go back to school, back to the future, or even back to the beach, then the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast is for you. I'm Tim Williams, the creator and host, and on each episode, I'm joined by a guest co-host as we revisit a different 80s flick to discuss our first-time watch memories, iconic scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories along the way. New episodes drop every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an episode of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast.
All right, let's get into the moving panels behind Logan. And before we get actually into the comics, I do want to jump back to the previous movie of the, I guess you would call Wolverine trilogy, and that was The Wolverine, because I did find it interesting that in that movie, Yukio tells Logan that he will die on his back with blood everywhere, holding his heart in his hands.
Yep. And that's what happens. So
that's what happens. He dies on his back.
It is really cool. It is a cool foreshadowing.
I mean, obviously his heart is Laura in this case, but yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of hard.
Do you think that was intentional?
I do. I think that somebody picked up on that, and I don't know if when they gave that death prophecy that they had already thought of Logan and how that was going to play out, but I do think that by the time they're writing Logan, somebody knew that part of the story enough from the cinematic world, knew that line and decided to do that. So I don't think that's just a happy accident.
So you think the line came first, and then they made sure it came true in the Logan movie?
I mean, that would be my guess. I don't think a lot of the. I mean, if it had been made by Kevin Feige, I might think that no, it was all
planned from the
beginning.
No,
not with the people that wrote these movies. Because I mean, if you look at that, there's a Wolverine trilogy. But aside from the X-Men movies, there's a Wolverine trilogy. You have Origins. Good grief, you just listed it.
Wolverine.
Yeah, the Wolverine, and then Logan, and they're not even cohesive. Like
no.
They're very different movies.
Which is crazy considering that the Wolverine and Logan is the same director.
Yeah.
And they're even different stylistically wise.
Oh, yeah. I mean, part of that is intentional in the sense that the Wolverine really wanted to dive into the Silver Samurai run and, go very Japanese and that sort of thing. But he almost went too far. And then when he made this movie, it's way more on the, like, let's be modern and have a really gritty take on it instead, which is, like you're saying, very strange, coming off a very stylistic, almost like art film kind of take. So they're very, very different movies. So I don't necessarily think that they had thought out those two things at the same time, no.
Well, so again, and I don't think we've mentioned this yet in the episode. So James Mangold directed both the Wolverine and Logan, but Scott Frank was involved in both scripts.
Yeah.
So,
I would tend to believe more that Scott remembered that being in the Wolverine and said, this was a really cool chance to play that out.
Yeah, no, I do still agree with that. But let's go ahead and move
get him on the show and ask him. So,
yeah. Another thing that I want to point out before we get into the actual comic books are the fake comic books that are in this movie.
That were made specifically for the movie.
Yes. Yeah. This is such a fascinating story to find out that Marvel allowed them to use the X-Men comic, quote unquote, comic in this movie.
The aesthetic.
But they couldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they couldn't use actual X-Men comics.
Right.
So they had to create, which they did a great job. I mean, the artwork... even aging the comics to make them look like they're, from, that certain time.
I'm trying to remember. I used to know the number. They made, it's like 3 or 4 different. Oh, 10.
They made 10. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They made 10 fake comics with artwork. Yeah. The covers. I don't know how full the actual comic themselves were, whether they did every page or whether it was one of those things where like it was 3 pages that just repeated over and over again.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
and
kind
Wolverine's
of a cool
not
thing.
a fan. Wolverine's not a fan of the comic books, apparently. So.
Of course he's not, because he's in the blue and yellow costume, which he said in the very first X-Men movie.
Yeah.
He didn't. Yeah, he'd rather wear the all black. So. But, of course, this movie is based off of the Old Man Logan run of comics. There's actually 2 different runs. There is an 8-issue storyline that was built within the Wolverine series, and then the actual Old Man Logan comics, which had a run, a 50-issue run all by themselves. That was part of the Secret Wars storyline that was happening in Marvel.
Sure it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
We are not going to talk about those 50 issues. You heard me say earlier, they get very convoluted. They clearly were just fan service of, hey, y'all liked Old Man Logan so much, let's show you what some other characters would look like.
Yeah.
Older. Or even what would Old Man Logan be like with characters in their current state, which is what the Old Man Logan series did as well. But we're going to focus in our Moving Panels connection. We're going to focus on the 8-issue storyline from the Wolverine series that ran in June of 2008. It was Wolverine issues number 66 through 72. It also had a Wolverine giant size Old Man Logan, which was released on September 9th of 2009. This story was written by Mark Miller, who I want to point out because...
I'm just kidding.
Yeah. What? I read comics? I've never heard of Mark Miller. Yeah, so I just want to point out a few of the things Mark Miller has been behind. So he is behind the Kingsman comics, which has been turned into a movie series. He is behind the Wanted comics, which was turned into a movie that exists. He is behind Kick-Ass, which has been turned into movies. And me as a Superman person, can't help but mention, he's the writer of Superman Red Son, one of the great Superman storylines. He's also the guy who created the Ultimates in Marvel. And he's the guy behind Civil War. So this guy knows how to write comic books.
Yeah, no kidding. And even how to parody himself and the whole thing, like Kick-Ass, it's so funny to me. But if you were going to pick a dude to write this story, he would be very much on the short list for sure. So I'm glad he did it. It is, wow, what a run.
Yeah. It's a completely different story, though. Completely different story.
Yeah.
So for those not familiar with this story run, what has happened is the villains of Marvel, not just the X-Men,
Right.
all the villains of Marvel have teamed up and they have become organized and they have killed off almost all of the heroes.
Right. All the key heroes. And
yeah.
they've used the heroes to do it. So we get, in the beginning of Old Man Logan, we have a very, very pacifist Logan who has quit being a hero because Mysterio used his powers against him, and he murders all of the X-Men. All of the X-Men, apparently. So, which I'm a little, plot-wise...
Yep.
Okay, Mysterio's powers outdid Jean Grey somehow, or even
Charles
Professor X.
Xavier.
Yeah. So, but whatever. So he's murdered everybody. And as somebody who was a fan of the books, that was... I kind of thought it was cool how they were like, we're not telling that story at the beginning of Logan.
Yeah.
Because in the first 5 minutes, he just murders people. So, very violent, and he's drunk and he's, living this, somewhat debauched life. And then he gets, threatened by this group of gang members, and he just goes off on them and murders all of them, versus the books where it takes several episodes before he will even as an accomplice engage in any kind of violence. So I thought that was cool how they right off the bat were like, we're not doing it point for point.
Because in this 8-issue run, I don't think he even extracts his claws, or extends his claws, I should say, until issue
7 or 8.
7? Yeah. So it might be at the end of 7, and then you see the full thing in 8. Yeah. I mean, he refuses to do it. Now, he does fight in other issues.
Yeah.
But he does not use his claws. He, grabs like a bat or something. And
well, even the fighting, it's more of he drives, the spider car through the wall and runs over a couple of guys while getting Hawkeye. He's not really engaged in the violence.
Yeah, it's more of a defensive fight. He's just if a guy comes charging at him, he might grab and throw, you know. He doesn't actually do any of that. But and then also the storyline gets into the United States has been divided up. Abomination took over the West Coast, but then again, in some story we never get, the Hulk overpowers Abomination and the Hulk takes over and the Hulk becomes a villain.
Right.
Magneto takes over Vegas and kind of some of that surrounding area. But then again, at some point, the Kingpin takes over that. Dr. Doom takes Minnesota, kind of down to Alabama. And then the Red Skull names himself president, and he controls the East Coast. They show a map in the comic
several
of how
times.
Everything's divided. Yeah. And Middle America is kind of open, although there are some dinosaurs that kind of just roam wild that came from the Savage Land.
Right.
Where one of the T-Rexes is actually Venom.
Yep.
Venom has the symbiote has taken over a
T-Rex.
Yeah, so there you go.
Come on, it's a cool panel.
It is. You've got Hawkeye and Wolverine and their little Jeep driving away from this T-Rex that looks like Venom. But the storyline, I do want to get into the storyline of the comics. The storyline is that Logan is in debt to the Hulk family in a very Western kind of feel. He's just a farmer running a ranch. But the Hulks claim the land, and so they make him pay rent and protection and kind of a mob also kind of feel to it as well. And in order to get the money that the Hulk family wants, he agrees to do what essentially is a drug run with Hawkeye.
Right. That's the way Hawkeye sells it to him. Yeah.
Yes, with an old blind Hawkeye, which is another very interesting aspect of the comic. And so they drive cross country, and it's their journey. So really, the only aspect that got carried over into this movie is the journey. That's it. That's it.
That it's a buddy comedy. Both of them are buddy comedies. Yeah.
Yeah. But going into the comic a little bit, because let's talk about the comic. What were your thoughts about the whole Hulk storyline?
So it's so bizarre. Hulk decides to incestuously breed a Hulk family, with his cousin She-Hulk, and things just go downhill from there. So they turn into a bizarre inbred family.
Hillbilly.
Yeah, buddy. Like whole 9 yards. And there are like hundreds of them.
Yeah.
Not like a couple. Like they're a whole town of Hulk people
who all just sleep on the ground. Like I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah, it gets weird. But do pretty much everything else fairly normally. Like they go to a restaurant to eat. Like we see panels with that kind of stuff going on. I love that they have,
which also shows that they can turn human.
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, so that's kind of my weird thing about that whole run. Like when we get to the end and he finally meets Bruce Banner again. This is Smart Hulk, who is entirely deranged. And we get zero explanation on why. Like, it is very bizarre. So the Hulk part of the story is probably the weirdest to me. And that's saying a lot. This is a weird comic run.
Yeah, I agree. And, obviously, this was before the Fox-Disney merger, so we couldn't get the Hulk in this. Although, I don't know if I would have wanted to see. It's a great comic run. I don't think it could have worked as a movie. No. I really don't.
But
animated, sure.
And you have MCU characters as well. I mean, we already talked about Hawkeye. Spider-Man's gear is used. You have the spider buggy, whatever you want to call it. And Spider-Man's daughter was married to Hawkeye, which that's another whole weird thing. I mean, Hawkeye is older than Spider-Man. And Hawkeye's, I can't remember, he says he has like 5 or 6 wives, has had 5 or 6 wives, and she's like 3 or 4, but she's got to be 25-ish at least years his junior. Mm-hmm. Hawkeye is not the most upstanding guy in this comic run, which, to be fair, he's not in the books. Like, it's not the Clint Barton we know in the MCU. It's pretty, straight as an arrow. See what I did there? And but he's kind of a dirtbag in this particular run. But it gets real weird.
Yeah, and then even though we don't really have any of the Avengers, we see Thor's hammer, we see Mjolnir, we see Captain America's costume because Red Skull wears it.
I was about to say, you do have Red Skull, who is an MCU property, and like you're saying, and he's got the collected things of the different Avengers and Marvel characters he's killed. So there's a whole wall of stuff that he could have used in that movie, kind of thing. But yeah,
and then we get to see
different.
We get to see Old Man Logan Wolverine fly back home in the Iron Man costume.
Yeah, yep.
In the Iron Man suit.
That, but yep.
Yeah.
He almost makes it home.
Yeah, almost makes it home. He crashes in the desert, very much like Iron Man did.
Iron Man.
We might need to do a one-shot just on that, just talk about that. But let's, because, the way that he battles the Hulks at the end, that's a whole conversation that...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we won't get into. We won't get into. It's a great comic run, the 8 issues. And again, it is the heavy inspiration of this movie, but it's mainly just taking the character of Old Man Logan and bringing him into the movies. That was really all it was. But let's get back into the movie really quick. I want to ask your opinion on X-24.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I said I only had one problem with this movie.
Yeah, this is my problem with this movie.
Well, if it had just the CGI is not great, but you can kind of overlook that.
But it's not X-Men Origins bad.
Right. And I could have overlooked that if it wasn't for just a few scenes. And I get that X-24 is kind of the other end of the coin. You made X-23, you used Wolverine DNA, however you used it. We're not really sure about that, but you use that and you create this little girl, and she's, has this, while she has his power, she also has, some little girl things. She's got, a spectrum of emotions that you would expect from a little girl, all that kind of stuff. So I can see the logic in that. If you're going to engineer the next version of that, if you're a psychopath scientist who does this sort of stuff, you just create the rage monster that you were looking for in the first place. You want a killing machine. So you create X-24. Kind of the problem I have with it is it's super inconsistent. Like the weird scene in, I'm losing character names, but the family that Logan and crew meet on the road, and they go back to their house and have dinner with them, all this kind of stuff. So X-24 shows up to get X-23, and Logan doesn't know yet that Professor X has been murdered by X-24. X-24 is just coming down the stairs from having murdered, Logan's best friend. And Logan just weirdly kind of stands there and watches him take X-23 away, and they don't get into it at all. He just kind of runs upstairs to check on Xavier. Like that scene just doesn't work for me. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Why would Logan let him take X-23? Why does X-24 not engage in the threat that's standing in front of him? Like, all of those things are just sort of bizarre to me, and it's tough. I don't know. It's a very one-dimensional character, and I get that he's just kind of an extension of the Doctor's wants. He's basically a robot, but it is kind of tough.
So, what are your thoughts? This is something that I just got out of doing some research. I found out that at one point, Liv Schreiber was set to return as Sabretooth for this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that he had this part? It could have been obviously slightly different in storyline, but do you think this was intended to be Sabretooth? Because I can't help but notice that the look Hugh Jackman has as X-24 is similar to Liv Schreiber's look as Sabretooth, with that cropped haircut, skin tight t-shirt.
I mean, he still looks like Wolverine to me, even though I do see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think the movie that they would have made with Sabretooth is totally different, because Sabretooth is none of those things that we were just talking about that X-24 is. And I would struggle with the end if it was Sabretooth versus X-24. So I don't know. The way in which X-24 completely overpowers a weakened Wolverine and kills him. And
but like I said, I mean, there could have been a different story element. It could have been that instead Dr. Rice finds a way to rejuvenate the X gene, and so maybe he takes an aged, older Sabretooth, injects him, runs experiments, whatever, with this reversal, and then it youthens him up and makes him back to his prime form. Again, I'm pulling at straws here. I'm just trying to think. Do you think that the story was slightly altered where maybe this could have been Sabretooth instead of X-24?
Oh, for sure. In an earlier version of the script, it for sure could
because
have
we
been
talked
Sabretooth.
about it being a trilogy, and that would have been a perfect way to conclude the trilogy, is to bring back Sabretooth.
Yeah.
So
I kind
Kind of
of
my thought there.
so I understand your dislike of X-24, and I don't disagree. I do, however, like the symmetry of at the end of the day, Wolverine is his own worst enemy, and he, in a not so subtle way, gets to engage his worst nature and
It's that
overcome
existential kind of psychology that goes along with this story,
Yeah.
which connects back to the comic.
Yeah.
You know? So, yeah, I do agree with that. You mentioned about the end of X-24. What were your thoughts about the bullet that is capable of blowing off a side of his head?
Well, so full disclosure, I work in the firearms industry. So a lot of that is a ton of suspension of disbelief, because just the odds of of a bullet you've been carrying around in your pocket for 20 years fitting a random gun that you picked up off of somebody kind of thing is pretty low. That's not super believable, but it kind of is what it is. He's got an adamantium bullet. Cool. Where it gets a little bit weird for me is we already know that that Logan has healed from a very similar wound previously. That's why he doesn't. If you buy that this is a trilogy, that he had his memory completely blown away when Stryker puts a very similar bullet through his head in Origins,
but also did not blow off half his head. It just kind of dents in the front and.
Well, it went in. I mean, it destroys his brain, and so as it regrows, he has no memories that were destroyed there. But so, are we to assume that X-24 is actually dead, or does he regenerate? If he's supposed to have those, I don't know. So I kind of wonder if they were making a loophole to have Hugh Jackman come back. Again, like total stab in the dark, but part of me kind of went, you already did this once and showed that the Wolverine can survive this. So are we going to believe that he's going to come back? And you get to play the clone card, moving him forward. I don't know. But just the odds of him having a bullet that this random revolver on a battlefield is used for. Okay, sure.
All right, well, let's get into it. Our final decision on the show, we call it Bag It, Stack It, or Trade It. We know what it all means, so go ahead, Chad. I think we kind of set this right off the beginning, so let's go and get into it. Tell us why you bag it. Let's just go ahead and get it.
Well, I think it's kind of funny because we began the show with that, and we've spent pretty much the entire thing talking about nitpicking the things we don't like about it. So it's kind of interesting, but I guess really getting into it and seeing the disjointed nature where there is that sort of thing is what you do when you really, really, really like something like this. But it is definitely a bag it for me. I love this movie, mostly just because it really does wrap up Logan's arc really well. Like, it humanizes him. It humanizes Professor X, which, we've seen a lot of touching, caring moments, but like, he's human in this. He has frailties and faults, and you see, him realize, which we didn't get into this at all, but you see the scene where he realizes that he inadvertently killed a lot of people, apparently, in a psychic episode, and all this kind of stuff. And so just kind of delving into the humanity of the X-Men, of superpowered beings, whatever you want to call them, a little bit, getting to see Wolverine come to peace with all of these angsty things that he's been dealing with through the other movies, and actually getting a little bit of closure and completion to his life and being at peace when it ends is really cool. And introducing some cool new characters. I really do hope they use X-23 in the future. I think it's an interesting character, and she has a lot of things to offer. So it's a complete movie to me in that sense. Like, you get this whole journey, you get a lot of loss. You deal with a lot of Wolverine's friends getting killed, and the reason that he doesn't make new friends, because when he does make these new friends on the road, they get murdered and everything turns sour again, kind of thing. But then with X-23, it kind of works out, and so he has a little bit of something at the end of his life, and it's just a great story to me.
I agree. I could make a lot of the same arguments. It's a bag it for me. I go back to what you and I have said just in general conversations, and I'm pretty sure we said it earlier in this episode. This is for me, it was the first superhero movie that to me felt like a film. Like, it didn't need to be a superhero movie. You could still tell the same story. It would still be a wonderful story, even if it was a Western, even if it was just make it an old hitman who,
right,
is getting into, coming out of the mob, but he's getting pulled back in for some reason. Mangold and the writers that we talked about earlier clearly were inspired by movies like Shane and Unforgiven, which are the ones I reference in my opening. I even see a connection.
Shane is in the movie. Like,
yes,
they're
you actually do
obvious
see
about that
Shane
one,
in the
but,
movie. Yeah. But I even see a connection with the wrestler.
Yeah.
He knows no other life.
Right.
And so, this is ultimately, where his life ends, is doing the thing the only thing he knows how to do. And the fact that it is a superhero movie, but it's not a save the world superhero movie.
Right.
The world is going on regardless of what ended up happening in this movie.
Yeah. The stakes are real world. There's a group of kids that we get to know a little bit, that their lives are on the line. Yeah, so I agree with that.
I mean, yes, they do. He does kill Dr. Rice, which we didn't talk about, him being killed mid-sentence.
He just shot him.
Yeah. But they do stop them, which, you don't know. Could Dr. Rice's plan have been a world changer? We don't know. But we definitely know it's not, as of right now, a major factor. Yes, X-24 is the biggest negative. I don't think that there exists a movie without a negative.
Sure.
I really don't. Shawshank Redemption is one of my favorite movies, but I could still probably find fault in it.
Yeah.
And I just have to say, if this truly is Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart's final time playing these characters, that it was beautiful. They did it right.
Yes.
It is a great send-off for the two characters. Probably one of the best send-offs for any character that has been played by the same actor. You look at all the James Bond and all the actors who played James Bond. I'm a big Doctor Who fan. All the actors played Doctor Who. And there's been some great goodbyes for some of those. David Tennant's one of my favorite. Mm-hmm. But, Indiana Jones, who still has yet to have his swan song. But yeah, all of these characters that we've seen.
No, The Last Crusade is the end of Indiana Jones.
To actually give this nod, farewell to these two characters, it's beautifully done, and this is a great movie. This is a film. This is a piece of cinema that needs to be analyzed and studied in film classes, just like the great movies, of our time, in my opinion.
And yeah, I agree. And I think that the swan song part of it that you're talking about, it's so good that you hope that they don't comic book them and bring them back. You know what I mean? Like, you really do hope that it is a meaningful end, and they're gone now. So, because they're, not to get too philosophical about it, but that's real life. I mean, we all are temporal, and there will be an end, and we hope to make a meaning for that. So seeing characters do that well, resonates with us as just human beings.
So with that being said, and with us talking about Hugh Jackman, he is the only Wolverine that we have had live action. If the MCU, Kevin Feige, does decide to bring mutants into the MCU, are we okay with them recasting Logan and it being a new actor, or do we want, as you and I have both said, do we want them to just jump straight to X-23 being Wolverine?
Oh man, I kind of would like to see X-23. I like the direction that the MCU has grown in using female characters. I know you and Bethany had a conversation specifically about this. And so, like, with that in mind, I think it fits, for lack of a better term, the brand for you to introduce X-23. And I'm not even 100% sure that you need to have any kind of disclaimer on that. Sure, there's going to be some people that get mad about it, but I don't care. You can't do anything without somebody getting mad about it. So,
but I mean, we jumped straight to Scott Lang's Ant-Man, and it worked out just fine.
Yeah, but people were not. Yeah, that's different. There was nobody who was a huge Hank Pym movie fan, so it's a little different. But but to your point, I still think it's doable. I think you could go straight to X-23.
It works too with the direction that the MCU seems to be headed with, Hawkeye is training, my mind just went blank, Kate Bishop.
Okay.
And then we've got possibly Cassie Lang becoming maybe Stature. We've got Wanda's kids. We're headed in this, as you and I know have talked about at some point.
The new Avengers.
We're headed towards this new Avengers, the young Avengers, whatever you want to call them. That this younger group.
Yeah. Sorry.
And if Daphne King does get to still play X-23, she's right at that. She's approaching late teens, early 20s age by the time they probably get to this.
Sure.
And so she'd be almost perfect for it. So,
yeah. At the same time, it's Kevin Feige. If he decides to recast it, I'm sure he's going to do a phenomenal job. I mean, with some villains aside, which, especially early in the MCU, were not necessarily well written. If you take that aspect out of it, I don't know of a bad casting decision he's made. I can't just dredge one up where I was like, oh man, I didn't, so-and-so didn't play, Star-Lord very well, or, whatever. I can't think of anything like that. So I do trust the people at Marvel. If they're going to recast it, I think they're going to find somebody that's going to do a great job. So, how many actors have been made from this? I mean, Anthony Mackie was in stuff, but like he's one of the dudes now. Sebastian Stan, the same way. A lot of these actors have been found by Marvel, so I think they could find somebody that would play the Wolverine really well. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, because we go back to when they cast Thor, and it was like, unknowns, Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston will lead, this Thor movie, and then now they're who else could be Thor and Loki other than those two.
Well, apparently Natalie Portman, but
yeah, and Richard E. Grant can also be Loki.
Yeah, and an alligator can be too. So
which I love how we talked about how cartoonish Richard E. Grant is, and he plays the like dead on comic accurate Loki,
old Loki.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, again, this is a great movie. As much as we kind of pick and prod, that's kind of what we do. So go watch this movie if you've never watched it. If you have watched it, watch it again, because it's one of those that it's enjoyable every time, in my opinion. It's not one you're going to watch just for fun, but you're definitely going to enjoy watching it. There's no doubt about that. But thanks, Chad, for joining me. It's always great talking, and you and I, especially when we get running like this, we could probably talk for hours.
Yeah, no kidding. I was like making new points while you were saying your little closing thing. I was like, no, we're done. It's time to wrap it up.
No, we gotta cut it off. And I think we did a pretty good job for considering this was a redo. This was the take two on having to do this. So hopefully we didn't forget anything that we did in the first recording. And if we did, it must not have been that important because we didn't remember it. So I'm sure we did it better the second time. But thanks, everybody, for listening. Follow us on social media, and just tune in for future episodes. But for today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.